And okay, and so hope you all finished your first coursework. Now we'll move on to the second part of this module. And so in the first part, we mostly covered kind of theory behind data visualization, and we mostly using Tableau to create the visualization. And the good thing about Tableau is you can create quite a complex one, but without having to write any code. And sometimes it can get slightly frustrating because Tableau can get quite complex. And sometimes you just couldn't get the exact visualization that you want. And so this is what we will try to do in the second part. So we're going to try to create visualization ourselves. So we're going to be able to specify what we want to do in a programming language rather than say click through the menus and the buttons. Okay, and so this visualization were created and using JavaScript, so which is the most common, one of the most popular language now. What it means is if you learn how to create this visualization, you can, for example, include that on your own web page, or even include that in if you make an app. So it's all the same. Okay, but to do that, we have to cover something about web development before we can go into the details of how to creating the visualization. Okay. Let me. I just go straight to. Okay, and I already mentioned we're going to mostly creating our visualization now. We're going to using a library called Vega-Lite. There's a link there. So that's what the Vega-Lite page look like. So these are the lots of different visualizations it can support, but not all of them. There's even more. Okay, and then, so as I mentioned, compared to Tableau, you would have full control of the visualization. You can specify lots of the details, which you used to have to say click through different options in Tableau. Now you just can specify them in the code. Once you know how to do that, it's actually probably faster. And then the visualization you created can be included in different places that can run JavaScript, so including web pages, on mobile app, and even the Jupyter notebook, and you can run, oops. Okay, and so what give you here is a different library, and which allows you to, this is like the extension of the Jupyter notebook, but once you install that, you can create this type of visualization, which is the Vega-Lite and visualization, and in Jupyter notebook. So you just need to import the library and write the same specification, and it will display. I think there's other libraries or extensions to do that as well. Okay, and so as I already mentioned, to do this, you need the basic web development knowledges. And so today it could be a more kind of interactive session. And so if you have a laptop, you can try to create the page or practice as I show them in an editor. And before I start, I just want to get an idea of how many of you have done web development before? Can you raise either, can you click yes if you have done something, or no, you haven't done anything before? Yeah, I know. Okay. Tommy hasn't. What about, Amina, no. Chidu. What about Chidu? Okay. Roya?
We did it for a very short time, to be honest, so I wouldn't say. So I would say yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So it looks like most of you haven't done that before. I mean, even for Lakshana, that's probably quite a few years ago, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually did that for your modules.
Yeah, so that's a while ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the introduction is definitely useful then. So maybe I'll start with some simple concepts first, and before we get into actually the coding part. And when we get to the coding part, I'll actually show you when I code them in a code editor. Okay, and so in terms of before actually, so we can only do a very brief introduction to the web development. We cannot go into any topics in any depths, or even cover all the basic topics. And so it should usually takes an entire year to cover the basics of web development. And so here we have like for the undergraduate students, they have like a second year module. An entire module is cover the basics of web development. And we're gonna try to do this in 1.5 hours. So we're gonna to pick the part that's most relevant to the creation of data visualization later on that we need. So when you're using the Vega-Lite to create visualization, you don't need to know everything about web development. So you can only pick those which are likely to be necessary and try to focus on those. Okay, and if you have done web development before, which I've seen quite a few students in the previous, say, and among data science MSc students, some of them can do very well, much more beyond. And if you are one of those, it will be quite easy, this lecture. And otherwise, can be a bit difficult, especially if you have never done this before. As I mentioned, this itself is quite a big topic. There's lots of things to cover, and we only have very limited time. Okay, and so definitely I need to spend some extra time after class to catch up. And also I will list some resources at the end of the lecture that can help you, say, learn through practice. I think that's probably the better way than, say, read a book. And okay, and so the first, some concepts. And so there are actually a few different languages they use, okay? And don't be too worried. And so let's just have a look at them. The first is HTML, which allows you to add content to the page. Content in the sense you can add text, images, and videos to your page. That's what HTML does. And there's CSS. CSS is designed specifically for formatting. And so once you have, for example, text, and then you can change the font, color, or the layout of the page, say which picture goes to which part of the page, for example. These are what CSS. And finally, it's JavaScript, and it adds interactivity to the page. For example, and when you mouse over a menu or link, the menu might drop down, the link might change color, or pop out, say, a message explaining what the link is for, and these are done using JavaScript. And as I usually would say, JavaScript is very different from Java, and they share some syntax in terms, for example, how do you write different loops, for if loops or if then else. Otherwise, they are very different. Okay, and even we are talking about 3 languages here, and they are not like a full-blown programming language, something like Java, which is one language to do almost everything. So these are 3 which designed for very specific purpose. So I would say learning all 3 from scratch will still be simpler than, for example, learning one full-blown language like Java. Okay, and also personally, I think because these languages are designed specifically for presentation, in the sense they are designed specifically for you to show something in the browser. So that's why actually they can produce better results. But here, and for the purpose of data visualization, we are not asking you to design a good looking web page. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you to create a effective visualization. Okay, so the look is not the focus here. And so among these 3, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and JavaScript is actually the most relevant part. The library we're going to use, Vega-Lite, is actually a JavaScript library. So we're probably going to spend the most time on JavaScript. And then HTML is probably the second most important part, as you cannot do anything without HTML. And we're probably going to spend the least time in terms of CSS formatting. That's mostly about to change the looks of the pages, for example, to look it better, a different font, or different colors, or pictures. So those are the ones which is not critical for our data visualization task. So we're probably going to cover the least in terms of CSS formatting. Okay, we're going to start with an HTML. So as I said, HTML give or creates the content on the page. And so, for example, here, the different titles, which you can see as title for this page, and different headings, and this text. They are all HTML. And it also including other things, including links to other pages. So we have some links here on this particular page. And you can have image, audios, videos, and SVG files. SVG files just specific types of image. So you can add all these things onto your page using HTML. And obviously, we're not going to talk too much about image or videos for this course. Finally, you can also add the style sheets and JavaScript files. So JavaScript file is some of the JavaScript code, and you can put them in an HTML file directly or separately. And the style sheet is an external file where including the CSS format information. Again, we'll cover this briefly, cover both of these briefly later on. Okay, and the first thing to understand, a web page or the HTML file is made up exclusively of text. So you would know this if you've done any programming. So all the programming languages is just basically a text file. Doesn't matter if it's C or Java or Python, it's just a text file, and all those text is going to be compiled into code that the computer can run, done by some software or program in the backend, in the background. So you save them in text-only format and should allow you to be viewed on any browser or any computer. So can be a Mac, can be a Windows PC, and even can be a phone. It should all work. And the source code of any page is always available, and it's a bit different from normal software. For example, if you're running Microsoft Office on your computer, usually you will not be able to see the source code, how the Microsoft is created. But for anything that's run in a browser, you can always see the front end, at least the front end source code. We're going to see an example very soon. Okay, and it has the so-called two views. And the one is called the rendered view, and this is what we see usually. For example, if you go to a website, you would see, okay, the website has the logo, the pictures, some menus. Okay, these are the results of running the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So that's the rendered view. And then the other view is called the source code view, which is actually the code. I just mentioned because you can always see the code, at least for the front end. And that's a separate view. So if we use this as an example, this is a very simple web page. It has a title, a picture, and a paragraph of text. And that's what I call the rendered view. And you can always see the source code view. Oops. I click this. That's the actual website. And you can always see the source code of the same web page, and it looks very different. So to create that page on the, where's my mouse? Okay, to create a page on the left, you need to write something like this on the right. So if I go to my browser, which looks like this, so that's exactly the same page as we're seeing here, just in a slightly bigger window. And to see the source, you just right click and choose View Page Source. And it will show you, okay, the source code that's being used to create this page. Okay, and this is something you will need to learn to create and write. And it might look quite complex at the beginning, but I'll try to break it down. It's actually much easier than most other programming languages. Okay, and so very briefly, usually the beginning of the page is called metadata. It's some information about the page, but these are not get displayed. For example, it says here, it says the language should be English, character encoding use this particular set. And then you have this part, which is actually showing the content. So this is in between your body tag, and then you have article. We might skip that part, but you can have, say, H1, that means a heading, image means a picture, a P means a paragraph. That's why you have the headings, the image, and the picture. Okay, so for now, you don't have to understand exactly what the tags are and how to create a heading or picture. All you need to know is for each page, you have mostly a metadata part, which is the head between the head tag, and a body part, which shows you the content. We're going to talk about each of these individual tags a little bit later on. Excuse me. Okay, we're going to talk about the metadata quite briefly. And metadata is not important for us to see, and because nothing is get displayed, but it's very important and for the browser to display the picture correctly, sorry, the web page correctly. Say, for example, if I create a web page in Chinese, then I have to specify the language so the browser knows, okay, I'm using Chinese character on the page so they can display it correctly. Otherwise, you just see some random characters and you can't really tell what that is. Okay, the first thing is you have this line here, and it says doc type HTML. That means document type is HTML. That's all you need to do. And then you have these other informations. So this tag, say this is the starting of my HTML document. You always need it. And this attribute says the language I'm going to use on my page equal to EN stands for English, and you can use that for other language. I don't know, Germany, French, Chinese, etc. They have different code. And then the head part starts your metadata section for the remaining metadata for the page. So the first one, it says child character set is UTF-8. So I'm not going to go to any details here, but it just means this is a character set which allows you to display lots of different languages. So character set including the letters and numbers and many different symbols. And this is a very large set, which includes almost, I think, more than 200 of included symbols from more than 200 languages. So it doesn't matter which language you're going to use, you should be able to find the character in this set. And finally, this title. Title is something which you will actually see, and you will not see, say, language equal to English or character set equal to UTF-8. But the title is something that will display in the title bar of the browser window. And it is not actual in the browser. So if we come back to my previous example, this is the HTML page. And this is the title, but this is not what gets displayed here. That's not the title. It's similar, but it's not. But this is the ephemeral blue flags, Linum Louisi or something. This is actually the text that get displayed here, if you can see. It's a bit small, and I don't think there's a way I can make the title text a bit bigger. So basically, the titles appear here and not here. That's the thing to remember. And it's used as a default name for a browser bookmark. So if you if you bookmark the page, title can be used to name that bookmark. Okay, and then we come to the content part. And so this is where between the body tags. So if you still remember the pages we saw early on, we had doc type, the language, and then we have the head section, which is the two angle bracket with head in the middle, and you have the start and end tag. So that's called the head section, and after that is the body, and the body part is actually what shows in the browser. At the end, very end, you would have the /HTML, which is where it gets closed. That means end of the page. Okay, and then indentation, which we're going to talk about that quite a bit. This means the space before each line. It does not affect the code, and mostly just make it easier for you to see as a human. Okay, and so we're already seeing this a lot. These things with this kind of angle bracket on both sides, this is called element, or sometimes called a tag in the HTML. So HTML language is mostly just about these different tags. That's mostly what HTML is for. Okay, and you have the element itself, and some of the elements can have attributes as well. So that's something new. We haven't quite, actually, we've already seen that before as well. And attributes would have values. So the elements or the tags describe different parts of the page. It will say, okay, it tells the page, say, this is the heading, that is paragraph, and using these elements or tags. So if we go back to our HTML example, so if we look at still at this code, we look at this page, you can see all these are tags. So the HTML head, title, body, article. In this particular case, if you want to tell it's a heading, you use h1, which tells it it's a heading, but more specifically, it's level 1 heading. And if you want to say this is a paragraph, you say P with an angle bracket. Again, that means tells it it's a paragraph. Okay, and most tags would have the start and end tag. So the start tag will be, hey, mouse please. Oops. Okay, and so the start tags is always a pair of angle bracket in the middle is the name of the tag, and the end tag is exactly the same except you have the /, which indicates that's the end of the tag. Most tags always appear in pairs. So you have the start and end tag. And so in this particular case, EM stands for emphasize. That means I want to emphasize the text in between. So the amazed will be emphasized. So by default, that's shown as italic. Again, if we come back here, you can see this is H1, and that's the starting tag for H1. And this is the clothing tag for H1. We know it's clothing because you have this / here. And this is the text in between. So basically it says, this will be my H1 heading, which is the main heading for my page. And this is what gives you this part here. Maybe it'll be easier to do it this way. Okay, and so what I'm showing now below is something called browser develop tools. We're going to talk about this a bit more and later in the lab, but it is something easier to do. For example, if I mouse over this part, the H1 in the code, and you can see that this part get highlighted. So you can see exactly which part of the page that code is responsible for. So if I mouse over this one, and it says image src equal to something, so you can see the picture get highlighted or kind of dimmed with a blue shade. That's what it tells you, okay, this line of code is responsible for this. And finally, this P, you can see then the paragraph get highlighted. That means this part is responsible for this paragraph. Okay. Okay. And so, as I mentioned before, most tags would have this starting and ending element. But there's some special cases in this, for example, the image itself. We already have it here. And it does not have starting and ending tags. It only has one tag, which is img. Okay. And this one, it has other things inside the tag, in a sense, in between the angle bracket, besides the tag name, which is img, it has src, width, height, out, etc. So these are called attribute. We mentioned attribute here, and they are used to set the different settings for the element. For example, for the image, you need to tell the HTML where you can find the actual image file. So this is what the source is for. So the actual file is called blueflags.jpg, and HTML or the browser will try to find this file. And if it can, then the picture will be displayed. Otherwise, it will show the icon saying the picture is not there. And you can use width and height to set the size of the picture. For example, the actual picture might be very big, and you want to make it a bit smaller. Let me see if that makes any difference here. Okay, it does not really make any difference here. Okay. But important things is to remember here, you have these things called attribute, and they can have values for the tag. Okay. We kind of covered this already. Okay, so for these attributes, and not all of them is compulsory. Some of them are optional. Okay, and for example, if we still go back to this image example, the source option is compulsory, and because if without the source, you will not be able to see actual picture. And width and height is optional, so you can choose to not set the size of the picture, which is actually usually recommended, and then the picture will just display at its original size. That still works completely fine. And this one is actually also becomes compulsory. It actually just say when the picture itself cannot be found, it will display this and alternative information as within the picture it does not available. But again, the main point is some of the attributes, for example, source and out are compulsory, and the others can be optional. Okay, so we're going fairly quick here. And so next we're going to just going through some of the example text, the most common tag or element, and which we are likely to use in your coursework. So the first one is headings. So we already saw one, which is the H1. It actually have 6 different levels. It's called H1 all the way to H6. H1 is the top level, H2 is the second level, and H3 is the third level, and so on. The maximum you can have is H6. Okay, so this is some example of a simple code which has one H1 heading and then 2 H2 headings. Okay, and maybe at this time I can start my little code example. I'm going to open a code editor called the Visual Studio Code, and that will be the one we're going to support in this module. We're going to cover more of that in the lecture in the lab a little bit later on this week. So for now, I mean, you just treat it as, for example, like a Notepad or Notepad++ or any other editors I use. I'm going to create a new file here. Ooh. And I'm gonna call this index.html. And can you see the text in the editor, or is that too small?
I can, but it's quite small.
Okay, I'll try to make it a bit bigger. Okay. Yeah, I hope this will be better. Okay, and the first thing to know again is you need to call this file .html extension, and then the browser would know this is an HTML file. We'll try to open it. As I said, we need to create a few things first on the page, the metadata. So we need to do doc type. Doc. Let's collapse on this side. Ah, okay. So I just being a little bit lazy here in terms of typing everything. I use some shortcut, but you can see, I didn't even say doc type. Not too good. Let's do this again. Maybe using this. Okay. And so you say doc type HTML. I set my language. I set my metadata. This one is not useful. It's mostly for mobile devices. And give it a title, say HTML demo. And then currently this will be completely empty. And I could, it doesn't have it here. Live server. Okay, and so this will be what it looks like in a browser, and you can see the title here says HTML demo. It's very small. That's what I said here, but otherwise the entire page is empty. So now we covered H1. We can try to say this is a top level heading, and you can see, okay, so that's what the H1 would look like. And we can have H2, and we can say this is a second level heading. This slow one. Okay, once I save, you can see this is the second level. And we can do similarly to H1 to 3 and all the way to 6. This is the last. You can see, this is actually quite small in terms for the level 6. I'm going to make it bigger. Yeah, so this is just how you do. So you just basically need to create the .html file, and usually we recommend using index. That's kind of default starting page. Do your metadata, and inside the body, you can write things or add things. Once you write them, they're going to appear on the page. So we try some examples, which are the headings. And now if we go back to the slides. Okay, and the next thing is P. We already seen this before. So this is just meant by a paragraph. And so you can have a pair of P tags, like this one here, and have some text in between. That's all it is. And we can add some to our page. Let's add the paragraph here, or maybe after this one, we're gonna type P. This is my first paragraph in HTML. Okay, and if we save that and we go back here, and you can see this lines of text appeared. So that's your paragraph. This text actually is a little bit bigger than your level 6 headings, which is very small. Okay, back to this. And then there's some other things which you can do. So we're gonna just cover something very simple here, which it allows you to mark strong or emphasize the text. So strong by default will make the text bold, and EM, which means emphasize, will by default make the text italic. So if we go back to my code, and if I want to, for example, make my first try to make it more obvious, I can put a strong tag, put it in between a strong tag. And then what you can see on this side, you can see the first now becomes bold. Yeah. And if I put, for example, a pair of emphasize and put the HTML in between and save it, and you can see the HTML becomes italic. Okay, there is subtle difference between strong and bold, but we're not going to go into too much details here. And for now, you just need to understand if you want something bold, you can use strong, and something italic using EM. Okay, and then you can also make a list in HTML quite easily. So the element you need, you make a list, you need 2 elements. In this particular case, we're going to using OL, stands for order the list. And then between the OL, so we have the OL here, and between the OL element, for each list you want or for each items you want in the list, you need a pair of li elements. So that stands for list item. Okay, and yeah. So for example, if you look at this example, you have the OL, and that defines a list. That means everything in between will be the items. And for each pair of li element, this one and this one defines 1 element. That'll be the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So they have 6 elements in this. So, and by default, an ordered list will give you a number. So we're going to see this in the here. Let's say we add a list here. So I want an ordered list, and then inside I have li. I want, let's say, 5 of these. Okay, so this is what happens. You have ordered the list, and inside I have li. Currently, for each item, it's completely empty, so I don't have putting any text yet. And then if we look at the page, you can see this is actually what it looks like. So it's already creating the numbers for you. So you don't have to type in 1, 2, 3, and 4 for you. Yeah. And then I'm going to just be a bit lazy. I'm going to type all of them at the same time if I can remember how to do this. Okay. This is an item. Let's say list item. Okay. So now we have a list which has the number automatically generated, and each list can have some text in, which will be whatever text you put in between the li element. So this is how you create a list, and then I assume there will be unordered list as well. And the only difference is instead of using OL, which stands for ordered list, you put unordered list, which is UL, and then you close that with UL as well. And then if you look at the page, you can see now these are no longer numbers, these are dots. So that's the default kind of thing it added if it's a unordered list. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna just go through these quite quickly. You can read them and later on if you want. Okay, I think this is probably the last part of the HTML, and this one is slightly more difficult, and it's called generic containers. Okay, generic, okay, it means no semantic meaning, which you probably don't have to worry too much. But most it does, it just group a few things together, make them one group. That's all it does. It does not display anything on the page. All it will is just group something together. Okay. So the one we're going to introduce is called a div. I think it stands for division or something similar. Okay. If you just have a div, it doesn't do anything. All it does is just group the things inside div together. That's all it does. Okay, and for example, let's still go back to our example here. I can create a div here. Okay, and after I add the div, if you look at the page itself, nothing changes. Still the same heading, paragraph, and list. Nothing changes. All the div does is just by grouping things together. Currently, there's nothing inside. But what I could do is I could put a div that groups these together. Okay, so what it does is now this div groups these things together. That's all it does. Yeah, and maybe it doesn't look that very useful at the moment, but what you can do later on, for example, you want to change the font for part of the page, for example, for both this and this. Then you can just only apply the formatting in terms of font to this div tag. Then it will change everything inside. And then later on, and we also need that for the created visualization when we add visualization to a web page. And okay, and that's all I want to talk about in terms of HTML. And any question? No? Okay. Am I going too fast, or is that okay?
No, that was fine for me.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's okay for me.
Okay, okay. I think I'm going quite fast because I have lots of things to cover. But yeah, but if it's just something doesn't make sense, just stop me or ask questions. Yeah, then I'll try to explain a little bit more. I guess so far it's relatively straightforward. I think when we get to the JavaScript part, or maybe it's like to get a little bit more complex or not so intuitive in some cases. Okay, we go back to the slides. Sorry, and now next we're going to the CSS, and it has this particular name, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet. We're not going to explain what cascading means, and style just means formatting. That means a file, and that you can including formatting rules in it. And so as we mentioned before, HTML gives you different content to the page, and CSS can change the formatting or the appearance of these things. So you can use CSS to change color, to change the font family or font size, or move the positions of the items on the page. That's what CSS do. And you can have a separate file, just as .html file, and you can have a .css file that saves the formatting rules in there. And we're probably not going to do that, and because that's not really required for the later data validation. So we're going to skip that part, and we're going to show you a couple of examples of how to constructing formatting rules. And so basically, that's the way you tell the browser how do you want the browser to change the looks of your page. So the first, you need to tell the browser which part you want to change, and this is called the selector. So in this case, the H1 will be the selector that tells the browser, say, okay, I want to change the formatting or the appearance of my level 1 headings. So this will apply to all the H1 on your page. If you have more than one, they are going to change. And the second part, which is in between this curly bracket, and is the actual rules, which tells what change to make. So in this case, it says, I want to make the color become red. Then it will make the H1 heading red. Okay, And then for this particular rule, you always has a property which says what you want to change, and then the values it want to change the to. So by default, the H1 will be black. And then now I want to change that to red. And you can have more than one in the same pair of curly bracket. And so you can say for the H1, I want to make the background yellow. That means not the text, not the color of the text, but the space and behind, but make the text actually red. So you can have two. Just to remember, you have to use semicolon at the end for each row. And so the order doesn't matter. So if you put the color red first, that also works. Okay, so I'm gonna just do that now. So we said you can create an external CSS file and link to the HTML. But here, just to simplify things, what I'm gonna do is I can add the style to my HTML file. So you do this by using the style tab. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna change the color of my H1 to red and the background to yellow. I'm gonna do the first. I'm gonna just say H1, so that means I'm gonna change my H1. Sorry, I don't need a. And I say color red. Okay, so just small thing, and all the spellings in HTML are American, so you should spell color without U, and if you put U there, it will give you an error and code might not run properly in the browser. Okay, so just putting that there, and if we go back to the actual editor, you can now see this one now becomes red. And what was the other rule? Forgot the background yellow. Okay, this is a terrible. Okay, it is not the best color combination, but just for demonstration purpose. And if we now go back to the page, you can see this is a red heading with yellow background. Okay, it's a little bit too much for me. That's too bright and not the nicest color combination. But here, really just to demonstrate. And also, this actually applies to all the H1 on your page. So if you have more than one, they will all change. So just to demonstrate, I can add another one, H1 here. This is the last H1 on this page. Okay, and so add another H1 to my page, and you can see this got formatted exactly the same way as this one here. So if you have more than two, and everything is going to be applied following the same rules. Okay, and then comes to the other part, is sometimes, for example, you don't want everything of the same element type apply the same formatting. For example, you might want this title to be red and yellow background, but this H1, I don't want it. And so this is where the class or ID comes in. It allows you to select which one to get formatted and which one not, even they are the same type of element or tags. Okay, and we're going to mostly just using the ID, and because that's something we're going to use later in the visualization. So for the ID, you first have to define it. Define the ID, which is like you define an attribute in the HTML element, and then later on you can refer to that with a hashtag in your CSS rules. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just show you very quickly. So in the actual code, for example, I just want the formatting to apply to this one instead of this one. What I can do is first I give this H1 a ID. So what you do is go here, and I mentioned the ID is like attribute. You just type ID, And let's say I call this one top title. Okay, and so this is like the unique ID for this particular element. And then later on, you can, if you want to refer to this one, you can just use top title. Then browser will know exactly you're talking about this one. Whereas you say H1, it will not know you're talking about this H1 or this H1. So as a result, it just apply to both. Okay, and then I want to change my rules now. So I'm gonna say, I'm not just gonna apply to just H1. I only want to apply that to top title. I need to tell this, and it is a ID. So just the top title is not enough. You can see now it does not apply any formatting now because it's trying to find an element called top title and then apply these rules, which does not exist, such things. To make sure it knows this is an ID, you need to put a hashtag in front. So when you say hashtag, it knows what's after is an ID name. So when I save now, you can see, okay, it defined the ID, which is the same, and then apply these rules only to this element. And then this one here is not get formatted anymore because only this element have ID called top title. Okay, so we're not going to show any examples of class. So the ID can not only be used to assign formatting rules later on, we can use that in the JavaScript as well. So basically, ID give you a way to identify an element on your page straight away. That's the main role of the ID. Okay. Okay, so we explained briefly what style sheet is, and you can add this to the HTML page in 3 ways. And so first one is the external style sheet. And this is the preferred choice when you're actually developing a website. But for this module, you don't even need any formatting. So we're not going to show any particular examples how to do that. And the second way is called embedded, which is actually what we used, and is using the style section, sorry, style tag in the head section. So I have this style, and then creating my formatting rules there. So whatever I created here would apply to all the elements on this page. So when this was H1, so all the H1 on this page will be affected by the rules. And the last one is called inline style. Inline style means I'm including the CSS formatting as an attribute in HTML element. So it will affect that particular element only. Okay, I just to demonstrate. So for example, I can do something. Let's do a new li. Yeah, and so what this does is says for the li, I have quite a few here. I want its color to be blue. So all these texts should be blue. So if I go to my browser, you can see, okay, all my texts are blue now. Okay, so this is the second one. And for the third one, I'm gonna including this as part of the attributes of element, and then only that element with the code will be affected. So I'm gonna comment this out first. So no longer blue. So what you do is you say style, and then this is as a attribute, and then it has a value. You say color blue. Okay, and then I save it, and you can see now only this li is affected. The other li's is remain the default color, which is still black. So that's the third way. Okay, and so for this module, most likely you're going to be either using and this way to specify formatting, or this way to specify formatting. And actually, early on, we saw an example of image. It's actually also used this kind of formatting. So if you remember, we had this image. Not the ideal, just say image. And you would have attributes. So you can see that source, SRC, which stands for source, and alt, which stands for alternative text, are default ones. But you can also remember we have attributes, something like width and height. And this is almost like CSS formatting because they are setting the size of the picture, which should be what CSS does. Okay, let's come back to the slides. Okay, so we already talked about this, which is embedded. The example would be have a style tag inside the head section, and then you put the rules in between the style. So this is what we did in this example. We had the style tag, and we put some formatting rules in between. So that gives you the embedded way. And finally, inline. So this is where the style itself, or the formatting rules, is as an attribute for the element. And for example, here you have style, it's changing the borders of the picture and give it a new border. And in this way, it only affects one element. Okay. Yeah. Again, so we're using very little CSS for this module. So we're not going to go into too much details. I'll give you just a couple of three examples of different CSS formatting, and I will move on to JavaScript. And so the first is you can change the alignment of the text. So you can just say text align, and then give it the value either left or right, center, or justified. Yeah. So for example, most common one is you might want your heading to be centered, and by default, it will be on the left. So you can see all these headings are on the left. So you could say, and for my H1, I want my text align to be center. Okay, and then you can see now the text will be in the middle of the line. And this actually changes as you change the size. It will try to stay in the middle, and even as the page size changes. And you can do, say, left, which is the default one. You can do right, which will align the text onto the right. Okay. Which is not always useful, but an option to do. Okay, and then you can also change the size or the font size, the text size in any element, so that including the headings, the paragraph, the list. Okay, and the property you want to change is just called font size, and you set. In this example, you can set either as a percentage. So if you say font size 100%, that means the original size. Or you can use something called EM. Again, it's a relative size. 1 EM is the same as 100%. So 1.375 EM means 137.5%. So I can again show this very quickly. Okay, for example, if I want to change the size of my H6. So what I need to do is I first want to say H6, and I want to change the size, or to say font size. And I can say now I want it to be twice as big. So I can either say 200%, and I save. So it becomes much bigger. It's different from 2, or I can say 2em, and it gives you the same size. Okay. So when you say 100%, okay, it is the 100% of the standard size. In a sense, this now is the same as the default paragraph text size. That's 100%. So it's not the original size. I just give it no value to give error. So that's the original size, which is much smaller. But if you give 100% or 1em, it gives you the one kind of standard size, which is this paragraph size. You can see now they are more or less the same size, or same as these ones. Okay. So that's how you change font size. And then you can also set colors. I mean, we already seen how you can change color by using the color property, and then you can use the color name, like a red, yellow, black, blue, or you can be more specific. You can set RGB colors, so you can customize different colors to the levels, very specific colors you want, rather than these more general color names you can use. Again, we're not going to go through too much details here, as this is probably the least important part among the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, I think we're doing okay on time. Now we're going to the JavaScript, which is probably the most relevant part. So JavaScript is much more like a programming language you would have come across before. So it actually say have variables. You can define a loop or even object or class or array, these common things you would have in a programming language. Whereas, say, the HTML, CSS is much less like those traditional programming languages. It's usually just define some tags, and specific properties and values. That's mostly about it. So in comparison, JavaScript will be much more complex than HTML, CSS, but also useful for the visualization part, because that allows to create visualization on the web page. Okay, I assume you all know what a variable is, right? Or the general concept of variable in any programming languages. Yes, okay, good. Yeah, so I can just go through this quite quickly. So variable is something you can use to hold certain values. And in JavaScript, you use var to say, I want to declare a variable. That will be the names of the variable. And then this will be the values that you put inside the variable. Okay, so in a sense, it's very similar to other programming language. And the main difference is here. In JavaScript, you do not need to specify the types of variables. Say, for example, Java, you have to specify whether it's integer, it's a Boolean, or it's a floating number. In JavaScript, it doesn't care. It just says, so long as you tell me this is a variable, and you can put any type of values inside. So it could be numbers, could it be text, could it be an even array. That's all okay. It doesn't really care. Okay. Some things maybe to go through fairly quickly here. You need semicolon to say that's the end of line in JavaScript. I think in that sense it's similar to Java. And if you want a comment, you use 2 / lines. Then this will be the comment. So this will not try to run this code. Okay. And the space doesn't matter. So you can have lots of space between the x and the equal, and then between the equal and 2, 2, 3, 3. The code is still the same. Okay, and for text, and you need to use either double quote or single quote. It all works, but then the JavaScript will treat whatever in between as a string, as text. Even you put a number inside. For example, if you put double quote 1, 2, 3, 4, double quote, it will treat the 1, 2, 3, 4 as a string instead of a number. Yeah, we already talked about the var, which is used to define the variable name. And then Boolean. Boolean is a binary. You can only have either true or false values for Boolean. Again, you don't have to define, say, my variable is a Boolean. You just give it either true or false, and then JavaScript knows will treat it as a Boolean. Okay, and the last one, you can actually define a variable without giving the value. That's also okay. And so you can say var width, which currently does not have any value. So we don't know whether it will be, say, a text or string or number. That's something probably will give it the value later on. Okay, and in terms of adding JavaScript to HTML file, there are actually, again, a few different ways. So you can first, similar to the embedded or the second option in the CSS, you can use a pair of script tag in the head section of your page and to including the JavaScript. Or you can use an external file, for example, called mycode.js. So .js means that's a JavaScript file. You put all your code in there and you load that file saying script and src source equal to this. That's the second way. And the last way, and you can actually put some JavaScript code in the body as well. You just need to put that in between a pair of script tags. And again, for this module, to simplify things, we can only use this to load external libraries. So these are the things you didn't write, you just want to use them. For example, Vega-Lite is an external library. You need to load several JavaScript files before you can use it. So we can do it this way. For any JavaScript you actually need to write, we can either put that in the head section or in the body using the script tag. So you don't have to write an external file to put your script. Okay. So this is a simple HTML file. It's a little bit different. I think we might just end up using the same file as before. And so if we come back here, okay, maybe we'll tidy up the code a little bit now. For example, I don't need this anymore. So instead of commenting this out, what is happening? Instead of commenting this out, I can just delete it. So I have a bit more space. Okay, so if I want to add some JavaScript to this file now, I can just use a pair of script tag, and then can start doing this. Okay. So for example, now I defined a variable. The variable name is called my first variable, and it has a value called 123. And obviously, you can't really do anything with that yet. But at least there's one thing I can do. If I go to the browser, this is my page. It doesn't really change anything because I didn't use this value to do anything yet. But if you go to the developer tools and then go to console, so the console is something like the command line you get on your computer. It has Windows or Linux or Mac, and you can type in commands. But this is only runs, and it will be aware of the page you created. So if I type in my first variable and I enter, it will give you 123. So it's recognized this is a variable I created, and it will know what its value is. And you can actually change the value here as well. You can say my first variable equal to 345. And if you try to do the same variable again, it becomes 345. Okay, so that you know. So this is running on your page. Okay, and back to slides. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna using something called document dot get element by ID to refer to one of the elements on the page. So the document is predefined object which represents the entire page, and this is one of its element. Sorry, its method. What it is, you can use that to point into or return element by its ID. And then finally, this will be the ID that you defined. And if the ID matches with any element on the page, that element will be returned. And then once you get an element, and you can use this to do something. Yeah. And so you can say var planet, a variable called planet, and it says equal to document.getElement by ID green planet. So this needs to be some kind of ID. So let's go to my code. I can say var top title equal to document dot get element by ID followed by the actual ID. So the actual ID, you need to give it as a string. So we have the quote here. I use single quote, double quote also works. For example, I will say set that into top title. Okay, so then now and top title will refer to this h1 in my page, and then I can make some changes I want after that. So let's go back to the actual page. Okay, and in this case, it can say this planet, in our case, the top title dot in the HTML equal to something else. So that will change the text that's going to be displayed. Okay, and we can try to put that in. So in this case, I defined the variable which refers to this element with the ID called top title, and then I say top title dot in the HTML equal to my first variable. So ideally, what it should do is now it should change h1. Instead of showing this is a top level heading, instead of showing 1, 2, 3. That's what this code is supposed to do. But if we run this in our page, you can see, we refresh the page, you can see this one does not change, or did not change to 1, 2, 3. And also in the console, we actually have an error. It says type error cannot set the property in the HTML of now. Now means something does not exist. But also better, it actually tells you where that error happens. It says on the index.html file, line 22. And if you click, it actually goes to show you the code where the synced error happened. Okay, and does anyone knows why this happens? So say, I'm pretty sure I refer to the correct element or with the correct ID value. Why it still tells me it cannot find this element called top title? Anyone?
Is it because you haven't actually put a capital letter on the top title? Because
You mean here? I should put a capital letter.
Yeah.
Or here. Okay, I can try that. I think the important thing is you have to make sure these two text, top title here and top title here, are the same. That's how you get to the element. And okay, for example, if I call this title 1, Yeah, and I will still get the same error here. Okay, and the reason this happens is because the way that the kind of page is displayed or JavaScript is run, it actually runs line by line. So when the browser loads this page, it will read the first line first. Okay, it tells me that's HTML file. I'll try to display HTML file, and then read the second line. Okay, I'm going to set the language for the page into English, and goes on. So by the time it goes here, so it's trying to find the element whose ID is called title1. This line of code, which is behind it, has not been run yet. If that makes sense. So basically, the browser does not know what exists on the page. It does not. There's a h1 there, which the ID is called title1, and there's h2. Those has not been added to the browser yet, so it does not know they are there. So as a result, it gives you this an error because it cannot find something with a title called title1. Okay, and so to solve this problem, and the easiest thing, which is not usually always good, is to just move the script to the end of your page. That's actually why you see this is done quite often. So I'm gonna put this at the very end of my page. Okay, so what it does is ensures by the time I try to run my script, all the HTML has already been loaded and displayed on my page. And this is what happened here. Now, if you look at this page, you can see the heading now becomes 1, 2, 3, and it's no longer whatever I typed in here. Say this is a top level heading. Yeah. So I think that is something you need to be aware. So later on, when you try to create a visualization, and in the Vega-Lite, whatever you're referring to in your code, you have to make sure that's already been defined in HTML before that. There's more proper way to make sure the page is loaded before you run the code. But again, just because of time, I'm going to skip that part. So for you, just to remember, you can either just put the script at the very end of the HTML document, or at least after wherever you need. For example, here, we need this h1. So long as you put it after this h1, it would work. So I could take this out and put it here. This is not the best practice, but you can see the page now still works. It still works. It changed to 1, 2, 3, and there's no error displayed in the console here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then I'm gonna just go through these. So basically, these slides talk about the same thing about how do you make sure an element on the page already exists before you refer to them. So it actually tells you a proper way, and how do you make sure you wait till the page is fully loaded before you run any code. So you can have a look. Okay, and this is the last thing I want to cover today, and it's something called JSON data format. That's actually how you're going to use to specify the validations in Vega-Lite later. And so JSON stands for JavaScript Object or Notation. You don't have to remember exactly what that means, but just remember that is a data format. It is designed to transfer data. So its role in some way is similar to XML. I think some of them would have heard it. Okay, so this is what a JSON object look like. So the actual JSON object starts from here and ends from here. In this case, we define a variable called person, so you can refer to this object later. And the key thing here is the so-called key value pairs. So JSON object is made up of key value pairs. So this is the key called the first name, and its value is called Chaitanya or something. And this is another key. The key is called last name, and its value is Sing. And finally, we have a third key, which is age, and the value is 28. Okay, so JSON, in a simple term, just a list of key value pairs. That's really all you need to know. Yeah, and there's no particular restriction on, say, what key name can be or what type of the value is. They are quite flexible. But the main thing is you have curly bracket defines an object, and which JSON is, and then for all the keys you need in double quote, and then a column, and then if it's a string or text, you put it inside double quote, and you end with a comma. I think the comma part is probably get lots of people. This is a bit different. So in JavaScript, for normal line of code, you stop with semicolon, but inside an object, when you have different keys, you separate them with comma. And you have a second key and its value, and the final key with value. Okay, and yes, so just compared to XML, it has some benefits. It's lightweight, and it's language lightweight in the sense, if you compare to XML, you don't need to write as much as text to record the same thing. The XML is much more verbal, in the sense you need more kind of meta text to get the work. And it's language independent. And so it does not only just work with JavaScript, it works with any other language. And you can almost think of like a CSV, which is a file format which many languages can open, and easy read to write. And also the human, you can actually look at the text and understand it quite easily. If as a human, I load the code, I know, okay, this is a person object with 3 properties or 3 keys, and these are the 3 values. It's quite easy to read. Okay, and once you define this and you refer to the different keys using the variable name followed by dot, and then the key or the property name. So you can say person.name, which will return this. Yeah, so maybe I can, okay, I can just code something very quickly. Let's say, I need to use name, hi, job. Okay, so for example, I can define something very simple. I have my object or JSON object called a JSON1. Then I define 2 attributes, one called name, one called job. So 2 keys or properties. This one I use a single quote, which also works. And the value, one is called Kai, and the other one is called teacher. So I can do something similar here, and I can refer to these in my console, and it will return those values for me. So I'm gonna still do this one here. So now I can type in JSON1, and you can see if I just type that, it will entire object for me. Now for JSON1 dot name, it will give me Kai, and JSON1 dot job, give me teacher, JSON1 dot, I don't know, age, tells you undefined because you don't have a property or key called age in my JSON object. Okay, almost there. I think just last couple of slides now. And you can have an array of these objects. So array is a concept in Java. And if you see these square brackets, and that means an array. So in this particular case, we have an array. Inside array, we have 3 elements. Each of them is a JSON object. That's all. This is a little bit more complex than the normal JSON. Well, more complex than a normal array. For example, you can have an array of just numbers. This is array of JSON object. Okay, this is the second last slide, and it's probably the most complex one. In the sense, it's called a nested JSON object. That means inside the JSON object, in this case, we call the person. You have the key and value. So the property is name, and the value is this here. But the value itself, instead of say a text or number, the value itself can be another JSON object. Okay, so in this case, we have a property or key called address. Its value is an object, JSON object itself, with key called number 10, street, the boroughs, and city, London. Okay, so you can keep going. So for example, for one of these keys, its value again is a JSON object, and so on and so on. This is called nested JSON objects. And so later on, we'll try to create the visualization. We will sometimes need to use a nested JSON object, which is needed to specify something a bit more complex. Okay, and this is the last slide. So just have some links, and you can just get them from the lecture slides. So these are the online exercise that you can do, which it usually tells you how to teach you about the concept first, and then you have to do some simple exercise to complete, to kind of practice on a particular concept just introduced. So if I go here, you can do this. So you have to, log in first. But then if you log in, you will see these are the introductions in terms explaining something to you, and you have to write your code here, and it will check. And then it will tell you whether it's correct or not. If it's correct, you go to the next step. If it's not, you have to keep trying. And okay, I think that's everything now.